You think you should have known better. That's the voice that keeps you up at night, isn't it? It crawls into your skull, replaying that one mistake over and over, whispering, if only I had made a different choice. And so you punish yourself. You think, I could have acted differently. But could you? Really? Because here's the truth. That version of you that you imagine, the one who didn't screw up, who didn't break that trust, or didn't take the wrong step, they don't exist. They never existed. You were never meant to be that person. But you can't let it go, can you? Because deep down, you believe you had control over that moment. You're clinging to the fantasy that you could have been someone else, someone better. But if you step back, way back, you'll see that everything that led to that choice was set in motion long before you ever had a say. Let's unravel it step by step. Imagine a man, let's call him James. James betrayed his wife. He cheated. It wasn't a calculated decision, and maybe afterward he's haunted by guilt, disgusted with himself. He swears he could have made a different choice. But could he? What would it have taken for James to act differently in that moment? Let's trace it back. First, he'd need to be a different man. His childhood, maybe his father wasn't around, maybe he saw how his own parents dealt with relationships, and that shaped him in ways he never questioned. But to have different parents, he'd need different grandparents. Imagine that. His father would have needed a different upbringing, different influences that would teach him how to be present. And to get different grandparents, we'd need to go even further back. Their decisions, their values, shaped by the war they lived through, by the country they were born in, by the religion that dominated their lives, all these forces would need to change for James to grow into someone who wouldn't betray his wife. But wait, let's go deeper. For his grandparents to have different experiences, their country, their culture would have to be different. So what do? Change the entire social fabric of that country. The politics, the economy, the cultural values. Maybe they were raised in a time of economic hardship, a time when survival meant putting personal relationships on the back burner. So to have different values, their nation's history would need to be rewritten. And what about the friends James had growing up? They influenced him too. They were his world as a teenager, shaping his view of what loyalty or relationships should be. But to give him different friends, you'd need to change their upbringing, their families, and the schools they went to. It's like pulling on one thread and realizing it unravels the entire web. One small shift in the past, and suddenly you're rewriting not just James's life, but the lives of everyone he's ever known. And we're still not finished. What would it take for James's nation to be different? Maybe we need a different war, a different political leader, a different history of colonization or revolution. But to change that, we need to go even further back. Maybe it's not just about the politics or the culture. Maybe we need to rewrite human history itself. What if his nation was founded on different ideals? What if the religion that shaped his ancestors' morality never spread to that part of the world? Maybe James needed to grow up in a place that wasn't ravaged by certain conflicts or influenced by specific global events. And suddenly, we're going back hundreds, thousands of years. We're changing the entire map of history. But even then, we're not done. Because if you want to change human history, you're messing with the fabric of the universe itself. What would it take for James to be different? A different set of circumstances from the moment of creation. That's right. We're going all the way back to the Big Bang. For James to make a different choice in that hotel room, we'd need a different universe. A universe where every atom formed in a slightly different way, where every event in cosmic history unfolded on a slightly altered path. A universe where the stars aligned differently, where planets formed in other positions, where life on Earth evolved under entirely different conditions. That's what it would take for James to have made a different choice. Not just different parents, not just different friends, but an entirely different universe. And now, do you see? There was no other version of James that could have acted differently, because this is the only universe where James exists as himself. Take Sarah. She regrets turning down a job offer that could have changed her life. She looks back and thinks, if only I'd taken it, everything would be different now. But would it? What would it really take for Sarah to have made a different choice? She didn't turn it down because she was lazy or stupid. She turned it down because she wasn't ready. Maybe she lacked the confidence at the time, shaped by years of self-doubt. And where did that self-doubt come from? Her upbringing, perhaps, being raised in a family where success was always one step out of reach, where failure was feared more than risk was embraced. For Sarah to have accepted that job, she would have needed a different belief system, one that wasn't rooted in fear. But for that belief system to be different, she'd need different parents, raised with different values. Maybe her mother wasn't constantly worried about money. Maybe her father didn't push her towards safe career paths. But that would mean they, too, would need different experiences. Maybe they would need to have lived in a different time, in a different economic situation, where risk was seen as opportunity, not danger. And for that, we'd need to change their entire history, reshaping the family tree that eventually led to Sarah. Or think of Mike. He regrets not speaking up when his best friend was going through a rough time. Mike tortures himself over it, thinking, if I had just reached out, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled for him. But why didn't Mike speak up? Was he selfish, uncaring? No. He didn't speak up because at that moment, he was drowning in his own life, overwhelmed with stress from work, dealing with a breakup, emotionally drained. And where did that emotional drain come from? His breakup wasn't just about one person. It was the culmination of years of unresolved issues, patterns of behavior Mike never fully understood about himself. For Mike to have been in a different headspace to help his friend, he'd need to be in a different emotional state. Maybe his breakup wouldn't have happened if he had different relationship models growing up. Maybe he'd have better coping mechanisms if he had different experiences in school, where he learned to communicate better. But then his school experience would have needed to change, which means the teachers he had, the friends he made, the environment he grew up in, all of it would have to shift. Again, one small change ripples through everything. Mike wasn't in control of that moment any more than his friend was. He was a product of his circumstances, just like we all are. Then there's Jenny. She regrets losing contact with her family. Years ago, they had a falling out, and she didn't reach out when she had the chance. Now she's carrying the weight of it, thinking, if only I'd called, if only I'd made that effort, things wouldn't be so broken now. But Jenny didn't choose distance because she wanted to be estranged. She chose it because, at the time, she felt she had no other option. Her relationship with her family was fraught with unspoken tensions, shaped by years of misunderstanding and conflict. And those conflicts didn't just come out of nowhere. They were born from how she and her family communicated, from years of emotional baggage, from old wounds that were never healed. For Jenny to have reached out, she would have needed the tools to repair those old wounds. But those tools were never given to her. Maybe her family wasn't one to talk openly about feelings shaped by their own generational trauma. For her family to be different, they would need different ancestors, raised in a different time where emotional expression was encouraged instead of suppressed. And those ancestors would need a different culture, one that valued vulnerability over stoicism. One small change ripples backward through time, through people, through history. Jenny's decision wasn't made in a vacuum. It was the result of everything that came before. These examples, they all boil down to the same thing. Every regret you hold, every moment you wish you could take back, is anchored in a false belief that you could have done better if only you'd tried harder, cared more, been more aware. But the truth is, you couldn't. You were doing the best you could with the tools, the knowledge, and the emotional resources you had at the time. To have done better, to have made a different choice, would require you to be a different person entirely. And to be a different person, you'd need a different history, a different family, a different culture. You'd need a different universe. The chain of events leading up to every decision in your life is so complex, so intricately woven, that changing one single thing means changing everything. This is the reality of cause and effect. This is why you couldn't have done differently. Once you understand this, really understand it, self-forgiveness starts to make sense. You couldn't have been anyone else. You couldn't have made a different choice because this is the only path that existed for you in that moment. All of your regrets, all of your if-onlys are just fantasies, impossible stories you tell yourself about a version of you that never existed. And when you see that, when you really grasp that you were never meant to be that perfect version of yourself, the weight of regret begins to lift. You start to see that every mistake, every decision was exactly what was meant to happen, because it was the only thing that could happen. Regret doesn't just keep you stuck in the past, it keeps you sick. It's like a parasite, feeding on your emotions, draining your energy, locking you in a state of mental and physical tension. The body doesn't know the difference between an actual threat and a memory you keep replaying over and over. You've been stuck in survival mode, your muscles tight, your stomach in knots, because on some level you've convinced yourself that if you think about your mistakes long enough, you'll find a way to fix them. But here's the truth, there's no fixing the past. Regret is a road that leads nowhere. And the more you walk down that road, the further you get from peace. Your mind becomes a battlefield, fighting against itself, while the world keeps moving forward without you. Self-forgiveness isn't just a nice idea, it's a necessity. Without it, you stay trapped in an emotional limbo, never able to move beyond the person you once were. Now imagine for a second what it would be like to let go of that regret. Not to erase the past, because that's impossible, but to accept it. To really understand that every choice you made, every mistake you regret, was the only choice you could have made at that time. You weren't failing, you were just being human. You weren't broken, you were just limited by the experiences and knowledge you had. And when you truly see that, something incredible happens. The tension starts to ease. Your shoulders drop. You stop carrying the weight of that boulder that's been strapped to your back for so long. You begin to move forward, not as someone trying to escape their past, but as someone who's made peace with it. That's the shift. Self forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen, it's about understanding why it happened and letting it rest finally where it belongs, behind you. And once you let that go, you begin to heal. Real healing isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about learning to live with your scars. You can't change the past, but you can change how you carry it. For years, you've been holding on to regret like it's a punishment you deserve. But here's the truth: you don't deserve to suffer for mistakes you couldn't have avoided. You deserve compassion, the same compassion you'd give to anyone else in your position. Think about it. If someone came to you, tormented by their past, you wouldn't tell them to keep punishing themselves, would you? You'd tell them they were doing their best. You'd tell them it's okay to move on. So why do you hold yourself to a different standard? Why do you think you're any less deserving of forgiveness than someone else? The key to self forgiveness has been in your hand all along. You just need to turn it. This is where self forgiveness transforms from a concept into a reality. You're not excusing what happened. You're not pretending you didn't make mistakes, but you're allowing yourself to grow beyond them. Regret keeps you in the same place, replaying the same moment, wishing for a different outcome. But self forgiveness is the act of moving forward, of recognizing that you are not the same person who made those mistakes. You've changed, you've learned. And the fact that you even feel regret means that you're not the person you were back then. The pain you feel over your past is proof that you've grown, that you understand things now that you didn't back then. So why keep punishing yourself for something you couldn't have understood at the time? That's the paradox of self forgiveness. It's not about going back and fixing the past, it's about accepting that the past is what made you who you are now. And now here's the twist. Just as you were doing your best with the tools you had, so was everyone else. This is where the understanding you've built for yourself expands outward. You've been carrying not just regret for your own mistakes, but anger toward others for the ways they've hurt you. But just like you couldn't have acted differently in your past, neither could they. Every person who has hurt you was operating from their own limitations, their own experiences, their own blind spots. They were doing the best they could with what they had, just like you. And just like you, they couldn't have done differently unless their entire life, their upbringing, their traumas, their circumstances had been rewritten from the start. When you truly understand this, the anger you've been holding on to starts to soften. It doesn't justify their actions, but it explains them. And in that explanation, you begin to find the seeds of compassion. So, here's the final piece of the puzzle. Just as you couldn't have done differently, neither could they. The people who wronged you, the ones you've been carrying anger toward, they were trapped by the same invisible forces that shaped your own decisions. You've spent so much time thinking they could have chosen better, could have treated you differently, but the truth is, they couldn't. Just like you, they were reacting to their own history, their own pain, their own limitations. It's easy to think their actions were personal, like they had control over the way they hurt you. But what if they didn't? What if they were just as lost, just as bound by their circumstances as you were when you made your own mistakes? When you see that, something shifts. The anger you've been holding on to starts to dissolve because you realize that they were never really in control either. Think about it. Every person who has ever hurt you was shaped by 1,000 factors beyond their control: their upbringing, their culture, their fears, their traumas. Just like you, they were doing the best they could with the tools they had at the time. Maybe those tools weren't enough. Maybe they were broken, but they were the only tools they had. And if they could have acted differently, if they could have seen the impact of their actions more clearly, don't you think they would have? You know now that you couldn't have acted differently in your past because of everything that made you who you were in that moment. The same is true for them. To have treated you better, they would have needed to be an entirely different person, with different parents, a different childhood, different life experiences. They would have needed a different universe, just like you would. This is where the real healing begins. Forgiving others doesn't mean you're excusing what they did or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about seeing the truth of the situation. They couldn't have done differently any more than you could have. And once you understand that, the anger starts to lose its grip. It's not about letting them off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook. Because here's the thing: holding on to that anger, that resentment, it's been weighing you down. It's been keeping you stuck in a place of pain, just like regret has kept you stuck in the past. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, is about releasing that weight. It's about understanding that we're all flawed, imperfect, and bound by the same universal laws of cause and effect. When you see that, the chains of anger start to fall away and you're free. Free to move forward, free to heal, free to live without the constant burden of what could have been. And once you let go of that anger, something even more profound happens. You reclaim your power. Because the truth is, when you're holding on to resentment, you're still giving those people control over your emotions. They still live rent free in your head, shaping how you feel, how you see the world. But when you forgive, truly forgive, from a place of understanding, you take that power back. You're no longer a victim of their actions. You're no longer chained to the hurt they caused you. You realize that their behavior wasn't about you, it was about them. And by letting go of that resentment, you're not saying that what they did was okay. You're saying that you refuse to let it define you any longer. You refuse to be held back by their mistakes, just as you refuse to be held back by your own. This is the ultimate freedom, the freedom that comes from both self-forgiveness and the forgiveness of others. It's not about forgetting. It's not about erasing the past. It's about understanding that the past is set in stone and that neither you nor anyone else could have acted differently in the moments that led you here. And once you see that, once you truly embrace it, the weight of regret and anger lifts. You begin to live in the present, unchained from the past, free from the burden of what if. This is how you heal. This is how you move forward. Not by pretending things didn't happen, but by seeing them clearly for what they were, and accepting that everyone, yourself included, was doing the best they could. In that acceptance, you find peace. In that peace, you find freedom. So here we are. At the end of this journey, I hope you can see the weight of your regrets and anger in a new light. You've been holding on to these burdens for so long, convinced that you should have acted differently, convinced that others should have too. But now, maybe for the first time, you understand that everything you've done and everything others have done to you was the result of a much bigger web of causes and effects. You weren't in control of the universe then, and you aren't now. And that's okay. Because accepting this truth is the first step toward freedom. It's the first step toward letting go of that crushing burden you've been carrying and moving forward with a lighter heart. I want to thank you for sticking with me through this. Forgiving yourself and others isn't easy. It's a process, but now you've got the tools, you've seen the truth. You don't have to stay stuck in the trap of regret. You can let go, and when you do, the world opens up in ways you never imagined. If this message resonated with you, if you feel a little lighter, a little more at peace, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. We're on this journey together, navigating life's messy truths, and there's so much more to uncover. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this helpful, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear how this idea of cause and effect changes your perspective on self-forgiveness. And remember, you've always been doing the best you could. Now it's time to forgive yourself for not being perfect, because none of us ever will be. Stay kind to yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.